Evening all. I thought we could carry on looking at Tartakower this week. And I've got some more interesting games from this player, who was one of the wittiest players in the history of chess. A lot of amazingly witty quotations, and some of his games were really absolutely excellent as well. So let's have a look at a relatively short game. Actually, I don't want to ruin the suspense, but this game was played in 1925. Tartakower was white against Jack Mises. So let's have a look. Tartakower playing white played d4. So this was in the Baden tournament in 1925, 24th of April. So we see here from Jack's Mises the aggressive Dutch defence being used, and we see an aggressive gambit to try and expose the weaknesses as quickly as possible from Savali. He plays actually e4, and this is taken. There's not too many other options actually, which are really good. Knight c3, knight f6, and usually I think we'd expect f3 here, Staunton gambit. An interesting alternative for those that want to surprise the opponent, maybe, if you're using this gambit system. And actually it hasn't really occurred to me that this move maybe is really quite interesting as well. And that move now is the move g4. So normally we'd see f3 trying to get more developments, you know, get a knight developed free of charge. Okay, so g4, it's got some ideas like bishop g2, g5. It looks quite dangerous as well to try and get back this pawn. And potentially, okay, even this knight might be able to help if this was supported like this to get back the pawn, or black's going to play d5. But then g5 is still going to put pressure on the d5 square here. So an interesting gambit idea, a gambit follow-up. We see actually black playing d5 now, and it carries on g5. So what is actually going on here? Black now retreated the knight. I think bishop g4, maybe just bishop e2, and white will be doing okay. Just retreated the knight, and it's here we see the move f3. So this has actually improved white's position as g4, g5. It has kicked the knight right back home. Okay, so now the pawn is taken, and we see queen takes f3, putting pressure on d5. That needs to be supported. e6. Okay, so one asset that white has is this semi-open f file. Black's development, of course, is lacking. The light squares are good. This bishop's kind of hemmed in. Okay, so it seems a very pleasant position so far. So bishop d3. We see black trying now g6, knight ge2, and already if white's just given knight f4, then knight takes g6 looks exceptionally dangerous here. Okay, so queen e7 is played, bishop f4, and now potentially there's a useful move in bishop e5 just to eye that rook and tie black down. Black probably doesn't help his position on the dark squares with this next move. He plays actually move c6. Maybe he was wary in this position about simply knight b5 from white being quite dangerous. Okay, so the move c6, okay, it rules out knight b5, but now we see bishop e5. Okay, bishop g7, not too many options there. Queen g3, and white's got that nice battery for d6, also hitting the knight here. That knight is now attacked as well, so it moves. Okay, and now white castles. A fantastically pleasant position so far for white. Bishop d7. We see bishop d6, and already there's a lot of problems here on f8 now. And in fact, after queen d8, this next move is really powerful. White just plays simply queen f4, and the forcing move being threatened is queen f8. And it seems black is not really in any position to do anything about this. He actually resigned here, believe it or not. So a bit of a shocking game. It's one of Tartakower's notable games that can be found on, say, chessgames.com. It's a notable game, 1925. Quite a short, sharp victory here. Shall we review that again? We'll review this again. So it was started off Dutch defence with the Staunton Gambit, but with a big twist here, that instead of f3 we saw the move g4. So black reacted d5 and we saw g5, and now f3 seems very pleasant. A lot of initiative, a lot of development for white, and black of course he played quite a few weakening moves, maybe one or two more than needed, and it was all over on the f8 square soon. So bishop d6 coming in, and then queen f4. What does that actually black do in this final position? Also queen f7 of course is threatened. So there's two threats here. For those of you just coming in, now this is a game of Tartakower in 1925 against Jack Mises. So in this position, if the queen moves, we've got basically queen f8, and this is mating. So if the queen doesn't move, does anyone think there's a defense here? Just ask, because I just think there's no defense here, and this is why if black plays knight e7, queen f7. So it was a very quick and aggressive system here against this Dutch defense. Okay, so let's go on to another game, if there's no questions so far. So a game against a very strong player, Akiba Rubinstein, occurred also in 1925. Let's have a look at this one. So Akiba Rubinstein, one of the strongest players of his era. Let's just get the PGN properly. Hold on a sec. Okay. So e4 from Savali. e5 solid from black. We see knight c3. Will it be a Vienna game with, say, f4 coming up? No, actually, bishop c4 is preferred. No use of the f pawn needed here. Knight f6. d3, keeping solid in the centre. Bishop c5. A little bit stodgy, perhaps, you might think. This next move does offer double pawns, which would give white a promising f-file pressure. Black's not interested. He just wants to keep control of d4 here. So he plays d6. Doesn't mind his pawns being doubled. That would increase control of that d4 square. So actually white does do that anyway, though. He does take on c5. So is he thinking that maybe, perhaps he's thinking, although black's influence here on d4 is more evident, this e5 is a little bit looser than before. If you look at that pawn capture, this pawn is a little bit looser, and maybe in the future this f4 is going to be a little bit more effective as a result. So possibly he's thinking that, and after knight ge2, white can later at least look forward to f4 with a little bit more effect. And here he doesn't mind actually after knight a5 losing the light square bishop. There's not much choice anyway. If checked, just c6 and chase maybe the light square bishop around. So bishop b3. Okay, and black snaps that up. A takes b. A little bit of dynamism for white on the a file though. So now both sides castle. And a very aggressive move now from Akiba. He plays actually knight g4. Okay. So what is actually going on here? Well, by playing knight g4, he wants to play f5 soon. I think that's the main idea, to try and play this position quite aggressively. So the knight's actually kicked and it goes to h6, so that the move f5 can still be played perhaps. Or is there some other idea? Maybe it's just to play f6 against f4. We're about to see after f4, in fact, white's playing this move now with more effect. It's taken here, knight takes f4. And actually we see the move f6. And one idea now is knight f7 to e5, which would seem positionally a nice idea. If black controls that d4 square, then d4 is harder to chase the knight away from e5. So it seems to be going to quite a juicy square on e5 here. Okay, queen f3, and the knight heads for that juicy square with knight f7. We see rook f2, knight e5. The queen tries to stay relevant to an attacking potential queen g3. Okay, some threats might occur soon relating to g7. So we see c6, depriving white of the d5 square. Does black stand a little bit better here? After knight h5, okay, the mate threat needs to be parried, queen e7. Rook a f1, and now it looks as though something like, well, knight takes f6 or rook takes f6. We've got to get rid of this pin here on the g file. Black plays king h8. So how can white actually make use of this position with that quite a big knight on e5 here? Isn't it going to be quite tricky, you might ask? Well, this knight is not involved in the attack at the moment. So this moves to d1 now. Where is it heading? It's got knight e3. From there it can either go to c4, maybe f5 or g4. After bishop d7, knight e3. In this position actually it's decided the knight's best just to go to f5, offering black the option of taking it off, but leaving perhaps an aggressive looking pawn on f5 now. And we see this, well, otherwise g7 is going to drop in any case. With both knights eyeing g7, it has to be taken. And okay, not rook takes f5 here, which might actually, I'm not sure rook takes f5 fells, but it's not the move he's intending here. E takes f5 is played, which potentially the e6 square is now marked out for knight f4 to e6, for example. This next move, queen d7, temporarily it seems to prevent actually knight f4. Maybe black can sneak in, possibly queen takes f5 here. So he's keeping an eye on the f5 square. The knight on h5, okay, it's hitting g7 with the queen, but how can white actually intensify the pressure here safely? White plays actually rook f4, and now we see rook fe8, and the king shuffles away from that d file just in case. Maybe a check in the future if that wasn't controlled. Okay, so rook e7, And now we get a shift of attention. Actually, it looks as though, well, was white intending on playing something quite crude, or did he really want to come back to the centre? He comes to the centre now, and is there an immediate threat here? After rook d e8, black is clearly strong pointing the e5 square. White now plays queen h4, as though there might be a potential for knight takes f6 now, and this check might be dangerous, potentially. In this position we see king g8 and some shuffling now, queen f2, but it hits c5. That needs to be dealt with. Black just plays b6, and you might think no big deal. Rook fe1, king goes back to h8. Now there's use of the third rank, rook 1 to e3, and the rook comes now to the comfortable attacking square g3. So it seems white's wedge pawn of f5 is allowing these tactical operations to put a little bit of pressure on the black king here. Is the pressure actually that significant? The king goes back. Okay. And a little bit of a surprise move in this position, because visually it looks as though perhaps the rooks aren't coordinating that well together. They're not kind of doubled, are they, on the e-file? Do they look as though they're coordinating for some kind of killer blow? And the queen seems to have taken a back seat, coming back down to f2 just to hit c5. From a kind of logical perspective or aesthetic perspective, you wouldn't think there's a brilliancy combination coming up or anything. It looks as though white's just probing and nothing significant maybe has occurred so far. But can you spot actually white's next move in this position? If you want to play chess, please can you hide the notation tab? If you go to a different tab away from notation, that would really help these guess the move quizzes. So if I give you 20 seconds and try and avoid looking at the notation tab, if you go to the openings book tab, I hope you've got openings book, that would help. So 20 seconds starting from now. White play. Can you guess what white played in this position? Okay, well, often it's forcing moves which win a lot of games. Now on Play Chess here, most of you are below 2,000 at the moment here on this, and forcing moves, you're going to win a lot of games, I tell you, with forcing moves. If you just master forcing moves, I've got a huge emphasis on my channel at the moment coming up about forcing moves. I hope you can check out the videos on that, but here there's a very strong forcing move, it seems, on the surface, but to be honest I haven't computer checked this position. But rook takes g7 is a forcing move. There's kind of a queen which is sensitive to being attacked here as part of it. Okay, rook takes g7 slightly weakens tactically e8. Now it's only the queen protecting e8. Would you say that black actually did any rule breaking? You know, sometimes it's very, very difficult to intuitively assess if a rule break of some sort had occurred. It's actually much easier just to check all the forcing moves, even seemingly outrageous ones, to become aware of tactical vulnerabilities. And that's clearly what Tartakower, even in 1925, clearly these players were very capable of very nice combinations and doing this. So the initial rook sacrifice here, and now we see knight takes f6. So two pawns for the rook so far. But now it starts to emerge some tactical vulnerabilities but also an opportunity, a new resource creeping into the position, which makes this kind of special, this position. I mean, you really wouldn't have imagined the carnage now of these rooks in disarray, just probing and probing, the queen coming back, why this is all making sense now. The queen on f2 is actually, this pawn might actually become significant very soon. We see queen e7, so after knight takes, queen takes, so a forceful transition to this position, and there's clearly a new tactical vulnerability evident here, this pin of the knight to e8. But if you don't examine these forcing moves, these will just remain unpunished, I think, in your games. It's really incredible to use forcing moves for players at any level, really. But this combination here is interesting because you might think, so what about this pin? Is that really the end of black, that there's this pin that white can exert more pressure? So which way to exert pressure? If the queen went to the e file, then it's not supporting the pawn's advance. And in fact, this next move is quite special. I believe queen f4 not only puts pressure here, but the queen is ready to drive that pawn forward as well. So we see rook e7. What else can black do apart from rook e7? But then we see f6, this new resource creeping in to the position. And this is starting to be quite unpleasant indeed, because if rook e6 now, then it seems, well, there looks to be some unpleasant opportunities there, like f7. Rook e6 wasn't played. If we had rook e6 in this position, I think f7, and that pin is really, is it a problem actually in this position? Actually, it might not be. I might have got this wrong. Knight takes f7 here. Could be sufficient. Let's have a look. Hold on a sec. So in this position, if rook e6, no, it's not f7. Oh wow, it's even better than I thought. This is even better than I thought when I first examined this game. In this position, can you guess the move? So this is on the side variation of the game. I've seen it. I believe I've seen the combination now. But if I give you guys 20 seconds, when girls, can you spot what white would play here to win this position? So 20 seconds. Try and get the whole combination from this position. Again, forcing moves. Okay, the only forcing move you've got here, really, apart from f7, but f7 is harmless, is actually rook takes e5. And this looks ridiculous. Why would you be in this position, a rook down? Let's follow it through. Rook takes e5, forcing move again. What forcing move would you use here? There's only one real one of any significance, f7. So what would the queen do to get out of the way? We can even throw in a check, and it doesn't change the situation for black. King h2, and even though the queen can block the pawn, because otherwise we're going to play f8, we have in this position another forcing move. Can you spot it? Just queen f6. So this requires some vision, and that will be it. So in this side variation, it's quite spectacular, really. Then in this position, black is busted, it seems, after rook e6. Black is just busted because of rook takes e5 and f7. It's amazing how the whole position of Rubinstein was blown to bits through the power of forcing moves. Would you agree? Because superficially, what rules would you say intuitively did black break He was shuffling his king a little bit. It seemed safe enough, and then obliterated. In the game, he tries knight g6. And this doesn't help. Saveli plays rook takes e7. He doesn't want to play knight takes f4 clearly. So knight takes e7. And we get a similar finishing combinational pattern. Like the side variation, white just plays f7. This knight is helpless against f8. The queen tries to blockade. Well, black resigned here. If the queen tries to blockade, we have the check on either e5 or f6. Yeah, and then just queening again. But seriously, what does anyone think? Okay, this is a question from the defender's point of view. If you look at the history of this game, white just shuffled his queen back at one point, and it looks as though they were going to draw something. It looks as though this was just marking time, attacking an irrelevant pawn on the queen side. The rook's not coordinating apparently, but this is the brutality of chess, that the rooks, they're not doubled or anything, but it just seems black, who seems to have intuitively strong pointed e5 and d4 here with doubled rooks, is obliterated from this position. And I just wonder, do you find this incredible or not? Do you think this is just what happens in chess? How from a defender's perspective can you possibly intuitively realise the dangers here? I mean, it's only with maybe intense calculation of forcing moves that you've got to see this stuff, because obviously there was an inaccuracy played. Black was trying to sidestep, of course, knight takes f6, but there's an inaccuracy somewhere if this all works, this combination. So I don't know what you think, but I think that's a pretty incredible combination. That black seems to have a harmonious position with the rooks doubled, the strong point e5, but is still blown to bits because of this forcing sequence, where even this f pawn plays a critical role here. So that was a neat tactical game. It just shows the power of tactics overriding what seems to be aesthetically a solid position. You could call that a solid position that black seemed to have. Incredible, really. Okay, so let's have a look at another game. This one against Rafael Domenech in 1934. Okay, so d4, okay, and knight f3, and quite an unassuming opening actually. So e3 looks a bit dull, the opening perhaps, but it's a solid start to the game, and white has a very simple plan of playing for e4 later. So maybe get the bishop out later and playing for e4. So we see knight bd2, bishop d6, and it's kind of a reverse Slav defense. If you look at this setup, it's a reverse Slav defense, which is on the rage in modern times, in our times. This is on the rage, but he's playing this as white. And in the Slav defense, it's often an idea to play in reverse. You'd be playing taking on c4, but here taking on c5 and playing for e4. So what's happening with taking on c5 and playing for e4? Potentially it's weakening black's light squares in this particular position. This bishop is having a good time potentially. White's controlling that sensitive central square d4 here, and threatening things like ed and eyeing h7 all of a sudden. So the potential of the pieces is increasing a little bit. Bishop g4, and we see already white picking up an important trump card now. After e takes d5, already maybe black's a little bit concerned in this position about white's potential here for what naughty thing he's going to do next. and he actually voluntarily gives up the light square bishop. Okay, and you might think, is that such a big deal here? Okay, let's see. Queen takes f3, queen takes d5. Now knight e4 immediately threatens knight takes f6 check and winning the queen. So that has to be dealt with. Knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. So a very comfortable position already with this light square bishop. And this queen can be further kicked now with rook d1. So would you say white has a small positional advantage now in this position? Would you say white is better? Because I think I would. So, and white also has the option to gain a little bit more space on the queen side. He plays actually b4. After bishop b6, he has actually a 3-2 pawn majority here, which could be a very good endgame asset, this 3-2 pawn majority. So regardless of the bishop pair, which is also an asset, white's advantage also lies in this 3-2 pawn majority. And so he makes use of that now with a4, threatening immediately actually to win this bishop. So pigeonhole needs to be made for the bishop. a5, bishop a7. Okay, so far so good. White seems to be stretching out on the queen side, enjoying the bishop pair. Are there any issues to worry about? Doesn't seem as though. He can start creating a few more weaknesses. Queen h3, threatening mate. But the real idea is to create some dark square weaknesses, which he does. So g6, some dark square weaknesses have been created. Thank you very much. Bishop h6. Okay, after rook fd8. White now plays queen f3. So he's threatening now to terminate black with queen f6, mating on g7. Okay, black plays rook takes d1. Rook takes d1 and contests that d file, holding the queen down to d file defense. So now we see bishop d5, and there might not be an immediate threat in this position apart from queen f6, but now that's parried. Queen e7. Okay, the queen is tied down though to f7 here, so this next move is made quite comfortably, and it makes the back row a bit safer, that the king can potentially use h2 as well, but also h5 is going to be dangerous. Okay, black gets a little bit desperate here. If he's not doing too much in this position, what is white actually threatening? Well, also h4 might facilitate bishop g5. That looks to be a very serious threat, in fact, skewering the queen and king. So h4 is actually treble purpose, and I missed that. Pardon me. h4 not only gave the first row, it supports bishop g5. It's not just h5, hg, and so on. But bishop g5 is a major threat. This bishop is clearly not helping on these dark squares in this position, tucked on a7. So that's a major threat. So this next move by black, e4, is tactically possible. You know, bishop takes, we can just take here and then take on e4. So queen f4, just keeping this threat of bishop g5. But now on the dark square it can be kicked, bishop b8, giving black a little bit of breathing space for the moment. So, is white able to still use these trump cards from any sort of victory anywhere in this position? Does he mind exchanging queens? He does have the 3-2 pawn majority. He does actually play queen g5, inviting an exchange of queens. Queen takes g5, bishop takes g5, rook d7. Okay, just about. No bishop f7s, rook takes f7. There's nothing tactically to exploit here. Rook d2, now threatening bishop takes e4 because of that unpinning, protecting this. Bishop takes e4 now on the cards. Bishop e5, counter-attacking c3. Bishop takes e4, we have some liquidation. Rook takes d2, bishop takes d2. pawn up. Nice. Can he win with this extra pawn? Knight d8. The pawn majority, use the pawn majority. c4. After king f8 we see b5. And there's something spectacular coming up now. Clue. What does white play in this position to spectacularly use that pawn majority? Please on play chess, please make sure you're not on notation tab. So white to play in this position. What does white play if I give you 20 seconds starting from now? Okay, forcing moves again in an endgame, still relevant, can transition the position very quickly into something great sometimes. Bishop takes b7. Knights sometimes struggle with passed pawns, and in this position this knight would be struggling. If it did take, then taking here, and how will this passed a pawn be stopped? If the knight went here, end of game. You know, this a pawn is queening, so that's no good. So this is undesirable. So black just plays a takes b5, but now like a rugby attacker trying to go around the field, a6, now threatening a7, then touchdown with a8, get past these defenders. And in fact, if knight takes b7, we can avoid playing ab. We've got a blockade here on b8, so forget that. Just a7 here, queening, touchdown. So in this position, we see bishop b8, stop a7 in its tracks. C takes b5. And after knight takes b7, is black going to get this dark square blockade, leaving white with only a technical pawn up? What does he play in this position? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now, white play in this position. And who said endgames are not tactical? They were lying to you. Endgames are very tactical. They can't be memorized. White play 20 seconds starting from now. Anyone? There's some suggestions. Not bishop e3. It's not bishop e3. It's b6. The power of the two passed pawns here. It's overloading the bishop. These pieces are being crushed with these two passed pawns. After king d7, he just plays a7. End of game. What is the knight doing? The knight can't possibly hold up the a8 square. End of game. So that was the killer reverse Slav system, which we use nowadays just in reverse with an extra tempo. Let's have a look at that opening again. It seems, what are these boring openings these players in 1934 were doing? They're using cutting edge stuff in reverse. This is a Slav defense in reverse. The pawn triangle, familiar? Just in reverse. The idea of d takes and then e4, we see that in reverse in the Slav defense. When black plays something like dc4 and then e5 later, this is just in reverse, the same ideas, giving white a very dangerous position out of the opening. So one question, just technically, what would have happened if black had just done, say, knight takes d5? Was there a big punishment here for black, or was it actually okay? Maybe I speculate that without checking this with an engine, that knight e4 covers the f4 square, hits the bishop. Seems like a nice move. If the bishop goes back to e7, what could we do here with white? I think queen e4, I just assume this, I may be wrong, I thought it's answerable with f5 in this position. Is it not? So I would have thought knight e4. Does anyone think different, that it's actually queen e4? I think knight e4, and after bishop e7, maybe white can, I'm just assuming white can play h3 and maybe even control the light squares, potentially. I don't know if this is too outrageous to consider, just trying to control the light squares. But it would be interesting to engine check this position, because it seems, you know, black voluntarily gave up the light square bishop here. Okay, so bishop f3, queen f3, white's already got a very nice comfortable position, and 3-2 pawn majority on the queen side, as well as attacking prospects on the king side. Slightly weak back row, threatening bishop g5 here. Black resourcefully playing e4 to his credit. Otherwise, what else? But now this forceful transition into an endgame. The pawn is loose, it can't be protected that easily. With the rook hanging as well, the rook needs to move, giving white time to really just win this pawn. Okay, so he wins that pawn, and then we see this 3-2 being spectacularly used for a winning past a pawn coming up. So a neat game, one of his notable games in 1934. So that was at a place called Sitges, 1934. Now, the mighty Alexander Alekhine. Tartakower had a fantastic Olympiad in playing first board for Poland in the Folkestone Olympiad of 1933. So the mighty Alekhine, the kind of Kasparov of that era, had the same sort of element of domination and fear over rival players, casting everyone else into the shadows of might have been, or most other players. So Alexander Alekhine was playing white. So let's flip the board to take Tartakower's perspective. He plays d4. So a very aggressive, dynamic player with a huge imagination, Alexander Alekhine. Knight f6. Tartakower adopts for a very solid setup in this game. After c4, e6. Classical Queen's Gambit declined position, which, okay, leaves the bishop slightly bare potentially, but sometimes the bishop can develop on this diagonal. Bishop g5, bishop e7, e3, we see h6, bishop h4. It looks like standard kind of stuff so far. After castles, knight f3, black tries to resolve this issue with the bishop by playing b6. Queen c2. Okay, bishop b7. Alexander now plays rook d1. He's not yet developing his bishop. After knight bd7, he doesn't want to give black this luxury of dc4 apparently. He plays actually c takes d5. And okay, that fixes this bishop behind its own pawn. But there's something else which has happened in this position after e takes d5. And from a positional perspective, if we imagine the pawns of the soul of the chess, Philidor, going back to that, basically black's got a stronger blockade on this majority of pawns here, 3, 4, 5, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, but look at this side of the board. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 over here, and 1, 2, 3. If there's greater restraints on e4, then has black got a good potential for using the 4 to 3 on this sector of the board? It's interesting to consider that. Even though this bishop's hemmed in, it is taking a kind of blockade role for this pawn here to be liberated later. Whilst black can potentially use an avalanche like this on the queen side, and these pawns are relatively unchecked. In particular, you know, this b pawn would be with tempo on this knight potentially. So positionally, if you look at the pawn structure here, there is some dynamic potential to compensate for the bishop seemingly hemmed in by his own pawn, but it does add solidity to black's position and restrain the e pawn. So we see here bishop d3, and it's not threatening anything, no target at the moment. And we see now knight h5 offering the dark square bishop exchange. That's refused with bishop g3. Remember, this was made possible because the bishop's holding up d5. Otherwise that would have dropped as well potentially. So it's not a problem at the moment. And black can actually freely play c5. So he's starting to use this kind of majority against the minority of pawns here, fundamentally. Does white have any pressure, or is he going to be kind of avalanched with these pawns? Because c4 is also a tempo gainer. You think of b4 as a tempo gainer, but c4 is immediately also a tempo gainer. The bishop gets out of the way in advance, and we see c4. And look at these pawns, they have this lust to expand potentially. Can black really gain a lot of queenside space here while keeping a lock on e4? We see queen a4, a very tricky move from Alexander. It looks like a technical move, trying to punish black technically for the knight being slightly loose. The knight just goes to f6, which leaves this knight in a slightly odd looking position on h5, but it's not entirely exploitable here. It needs white to play g4. The bishop would need to get out of the way. As soon as h3, we can just munch this bishop. It's not a problem on h5. This knight here at the moment doesn't seem to be a major problem here. So it seems also this queen might be still, you know, a tempo gainer for b5 here. Has Alexander Alekhine slightly misplayed this position already? Well, knight e5, and now it's evident that maybe there's interest in knight c6. Or is there something else going on here? What is this queen actually doing on a4? Exerting influence there. We see the move g6 kicking this f5 bishop. It goes back to b1. And now a6, as though there is interest in exploiting the queen to try and get these pawns squashing white on the queen side a little bit. The queen goes back, and now we see b5. So you see, look at this armada of pawns emerging. But any b4, you might think, well, knight a4, and we've got a hook on the c5 square. White finally castles, and we do see b4. And no, there's no interest in knight a4. Black has enough control of c5, surely. If knight a4, don't we have, in this position, queen a5? Wouldn't you play queen a5 here? You'd contest the c5 square. It seems to be a lot of useful space gaining. For example, I don't know if any of you can find a stronger move here, but this knight a4 wasn't played. It seems logical just to play queen a5 here. So the knight goes back to e2. Look at black's control now of that e4 square. It's impressive. The bishop, the pawn, the knight, all locking down white's majority of pawns on this side of the board. We see now a very interesting move, actually. White tactically, or dynamically rather, might be threatening the move knight takes g6, because we do have a dangerous looking battery pointed at g6, and this next move might have something to do with that, queen e8, just indirectly defending g6. Does that give black less worries, more potential for using these pawns now? Knight f4. and we see knight takes g3. And another perk of queen e8, it's influencing e5, so bishop d6 threatening, maybe e5. Alexander Alekhine though plays rook fe1. He doesn't seem that bothered. Is it because of the blow knight takes g6 working here? Or is it because of d5 pressure? In the game, Tartakower played rook c8. Now let's just imagine for one moment that bishop takes e5 was played. D takes, queen takes. Can we not just smash black with knight takes g6? It's forking here. It looks pretty crushing. It's enough surely for a great attack, isn't it? It looks pretty convincing to me. Okay. What, or is it just a perpetual check? Possibly it's just good enough for perpetual check, but whatever, it was avoided. Black actually played rook c8. He's just interested in using his asset here without being distracted. He's got these avalanche of pawns to work with. Now white does actually use the e4 break, which I mentioned was restrained or attempted to be restrained. It looks as though black's geared up to restrain e4, but it's actually played anyway in this position. So the dynamic Alexander Alekhine is refusing to be restrained, and he's actually perhaps trying to undermine c4 here by breaking up this structure. After d takes e4, he does take on c4. Should black have some remorse that his beautiful pawn majority has just disappeared, or does he have some other advantage to play with now in the position? Well, he takes on f4, which gives him a little bit more control of d5. So he plays queen e6 now. Okay, he doesn't have to be too upset here. He's got nice control still of e4 and pressure on the c file. Queen is a target on the c file. b3. Now queen g4 seems to immediately threaten as well as a pawn. Potentially e3, but knight e3 protects g2 and attacks the queen. I was just thinking about this g2. I think the main thing is attacking f4 in that respect then. White plays queen d2 protecting f4, not worried about e3. He's also got f takes anyway, protecting g2 like that. So this bishop's not yet a killer on the diagonal basically. But queen h4 now threatens potentially knight g4 and he's on h2. And this forces quite a major endgame concession now from Alexander, this position. He has to defend somehow h2. It's an Achilles heel of his position. How does he defend it? He makes a transition into an unfortunate endgame looking position. So knight g4, he plays queen g3 defending h2, but these wretched double pawns now, and this protected pass pawn here, e4, protected pass pawn, nice blockading knight in front of the double pawns. Nimzovich would be proud. But does white have a pass pawn here, or is this bishop is also hemmed in? How is this bishop going to see the light of day? It's restrained by its own structure, which is restrained by b4. This bishop is not seeing the light of day here in this position. White's only main asset seems to be the d pawn. He pushes it. Rook fd8, d6, and we see rook c5 now. Okay, what is going on here with rook c5? Well, it keeps the knight out of a5 for a start. Rook d4, and it also facilitates this next move just to get rid of that knight. Go away knight from c4. Rook ed1, and he just takes on c4, and in this position he doesn't want to give Alexander two connected pass pawns for nothing with rook takes c4. That would be pretty dumb in the circumstance, wouldn't it? Two connected pass pawns, especially if they can actually be held, which they probably can be, because knight e3 we might have rook d4 here, and then bye bye we can say goodbye to black soon after c5. No, he plays in this position. We see after rook takes c4 a very clever move in this position. A nice bit of finesse. You don't want to give your opponent connected passed pawns on the off chance you can calculate that you're trying to win them. If there's a clearer way to deal with this without giving connected passed pawns. So this next move, can you spot it, what he played in this position? Black to play. If I give you 20 seconds here. Yeah, just knight fork, knight e3. It avoids the passed pawns, the connected passed pawns. That's the important thing. Rook takes c5, knight takes d1. The knight's also got a nice spot on c3 now. This pawn's also a bit loose. Okay, it's protected, attacking this pawn. But this knight is also going to victimize this bishop. Knight attacking the bishop. Bishop moves. And this is now, the knight is pretty nasty here. Ferocious knight, check, and then faults the bishop and rook. Horrible. No time for Alexander to win a6 here. He's going a pawn down. He's a pawn down. And this is still a protected pass pawn. His pawns are crippled over here. He tries g4. It's a bit of a desperate position. The game's mostly been won here already. Alexander's totally been positionally outplayed. This looks like a dire position. And black's next moves. Okay, this looks like a desperate bishop sack. And the game goes on and on though from this position. Alexander didn't resign at move 46. Let's just go through the moves a little bit quicker. White a piece down. Okay, he's got potentially dangerous g-pawn, but this plan, wipe out white's pawns and try and get that one later maybe. Just sack the knight for this one and wipe out these pawns. That's the plan. So here the knight's prepared to sack itself. Okay. King f7, very carefully getting this pawn. Okay, can just take the pawn now, leaving two connected pass pawns, and it's all over by the shouting really. The king comes across. Okay, two connected pass pawns shouldn't be such a big deal. The king's restricted. End of game. So a magnificent thing, just building up positional advantages right from the opening. We see that this opening is not so passive as maybe we assume with this so-called bad bishop. The bad bishop on b7, positionally, if we think about this game, was holding down white's majority of pawns while black was free to flood the queen side. The bishop's holding down e4 and black is free to play on the queen side here, as he did. This queen a4 seems a bit too on the techie side. Doesn't seem that thematic. Okay, so black building up positional advantages on the queen side. And these double pawns don't help actually white's king safety. When that occurred, it didn't really help king safety. There's no defensive classical knight on f3, so h2 is a bit of a problem. As we know in modern games, that can be problem, h2. And that's picked on here. Once this queen is coming around to h4, h2 becomes a big problem in this position. Okay, so no need to carry on here. We just got this beautiful endgame position where after the fork it was virtually over here. This position is kind of very bad for white. So I hope you enjoyed these games this week. I think it's been about an hour. We can leave some games for next week, I think. Okay. Thanks very much. Have a good week. See you next week.